All right. Well, good day, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on forecasting the future of recruiting operations with Jeremy Lyons. I'm Chavi, Assistant Content Manager at Recruit CRM, and I will be your host and moderator for today's session. It's great to see so many people already coming in, so feel free to introduce yourselves and drop a hello in the chat box. We would love to see where everybody is joining us from. And before we get started, I would like to understand if everybody can see and hear me clearly. A quick thumbs up in the chat would be wonderful, and then we will be able to proceed. Hi, Tom. All right. Okay. Looks like we're good to go. Okay. All right. So I'd like to let everyone know that towards the end of the webinar, we will be having a quick Q&A round during which we will be taking questions from the audience. So feel free to drop in your questions using the Q&A options on your screens at any point during the entire event. Okay. Let's move on to the next slide. Yes. Okay. Okay. Before we get started, let's quickly go over the main agenda of today's session. First, we'll understand the evolution of recruiting operations. Next, we will discuss the importance of AI training, tool integration, and support. We will then move on to the adoption and integration of AI in recruitment. After that, we'll explore some of the future trends in recruiting operations and the tools to use. And finally, we will have a Q&A session where you can ask Jeremy your burning questions about RecOps. We also have an exciting giveaway plan for all of you at the end. That you would not want to miss out on. So stick till the end to find out what it is and a chance to win as well. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, a few quick intros. This webinar is powered by Recruit CRM. We are a cloud-based ATS+CRM software for the global recruitment and staffing industry. And we are on a mission to help recruitment businesses all over the world grow rapidly. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay. Now I'm thrilled to introduce our speaker for the day, Jeremy Lyons. Jeremy is the CEO and co-founder of RecOps Collective and a seasoned expert in recruiting operations. He has established and streamlined RecOps functions at leading companies, including Verizon Media and Signal Sciences, achieving significant efficiency improvements and cost reductions. Jeremy also mentors professionals in career growth within recruiting and talent acquisition. And his newsletter, the RecOps Roundup, is read by over 2,000 RecOps professionals every single week. So welcome, Jeremy. Well, that's it from me for now, and we can get started with the session. So over to you, Jeremy.
Great. Thank you so much again for having me. Really looking forward to talking to people about the future of RecOps. I know that there are a lot of misconceptions around what RecOps professionals do. Sometimes we get told what we do is magic, and that is it's more skill than magic, but hey, sometimes we still work a miracle or two. So through this presentation, we're going to talk obviously about AI. That is the burning question around everything nowadays, how it's going to impact this field. The other thing too is we're going to talk about the people side. We're going to talk about the data side. We're going to sprinkle a couple of things in there all throughout. Now, one of the big things that I always like to tell people when it comes to recruiting operations is, what is recruiting operations question word? And to me, really every RecOps team starts with a why question. The why question is what helps us understand the objectives. It helps us create our decisions, know how and where, what direction we need to go. How and what questions kind of come a little bit later, but really RecOps is built on having that alignment and maintaining that alignment, because that alignment is really key to efficiencies. And one of the biggest things, one of the core tenets of recruiting operations is, how do we make everything more efficient? Now, one of the big things that I always like to talk to people about too is, where did RecOps come from and where is it kind of going? And I kind of said to people that there are sort of three categories of RecOps people. There are the people who started out the RecOps functions, and these were people who maybe came from management consulting, maybe were seasoned recruiters, maybe they were heads of TA who said, you know what, there are better ways to get this done, learned the tools of the trade at a technical level, and then started sort of laying the foundation for what would now become RecOps. And what we've seen now is, and probably we're coming to the end of, is our second generation of recruiting operations folks. And these are the folks that started out as recruiting coordinators and basically worked their way up the ladder of recruiting and said, you know, I don't necessarily want to go into recruiting. I like the program management side. I like the data side. I like the candidate experience side. Is there anything for me? And companies started to go, yes, there is actually something for you. You have a skill set that we need. And that skill set that we need is going to be really, really important for the future and making us more efficient and having our processes be really repeatable. And now what we're starting to see is this Gen 3 group. And this Gen 3 group is kind of coming from all different aspects of the TA ecosystem. It's also coming from outside of TA. And it's groups that are sort of really blending the technology and focusing on human-centered approaches. Other things that people start to ask me is, all right, you know, what does recruiting operations look like at companies of various sizes? What should we do? And this was a chart that I made a couple of years ago. Obviously, open to interpretation and revision. I think one of the things that we've seen is that at about 50 people, you're probably hiring a recruiting coordinator or you're hiring a TA person who is very operationally focused, because at that size, you want to make sure that everything is running smoothly and also that you're preventing issues that could come in from the future with bad data hygiene and elements like that. But as you start to grow and as you start to see that growth, you start to see more of a recruiting coordinator field. You also start to see more recruiting operations people. And usually at that point, your RecOps people might also still handle RC work. But the core function of what they're doing and what's really important is, again, maintaining that efficiency, making sure that you are staying current on processes, staying current with what the candidate market is looking like, and also what the interviewer market is looking like too, because interviewers also contribute to process and how things are being run. So somebody asked me, all right, Jeremy, how do you advance in recruiting operations? And this is, again, a chart that I came up with a couple of years ago when I came out with an article that said, you know, RecOps at a glance. And one of the big things that is really big is what we look at kind of down here in this ops sort of bottom piece. And there are a lot of different ways recruiting operations people go. For me personally, I started out as an RC, got into kind of being a recruiting operations specialist program manager, actually dabbled in some recruiting, which I felt helped me understand a lot more of the processes that are going on from the recruiters, all the changes that I make. It's important to have empathy in RecOps to understand what is it that the recruiters are doing or the sourcers are doing and how they have to operate in the system, because process for process sake is not great, but some process can help. And the other thing too is, you know, not every RC says I want to go the ops route. Some say, you know what, I hang out with the sourcers. I love the sourcing. I like to go out and find people, and this is where I want to be. And that's okay. Some say, you know what, I just needed to learn the skill and now I want to be a recruiter. Also okay. I think one of the bigger things that we're starting to see, which is kind of a little bit more fascinating, is the prevalence of former recruiters or a lot of recruiters trying to come over and be RecOps. And RecOps isn't necessarily just a tool set. It's a mindset. It's thinking about how do we take the individuals and the individual actions and scale them up so that there's so that you're basically thinking locally, acting globally, and people are able to learn and adopt everything, and it's not making exceptions for everything. So obviously, if you saw the promotional material for this event, you saw a lot of talk about AI and RecOps. You heard a lot about the adoption, the integration, pitching. You've probably heard this ad nauseum for the better part of the last 6 months, or even longer if you've heard, if you've been following since 2022 when OpenAI released, ChatGPT to the world. So, quick poll: how integrated is AI into your recruitment process? I'll give everybody a second to do that.
Think, is that correct? Okay, yeah, no. We're just putting up the poll right now.
Got a sneak peek of the poll later on.
Yeah. Yeah, there you go. The poll is up for everyone to answer.
Now, mind you, there's no right or wrong answer here. If you're saying we're not using AI at all, that's not a problem. If you're fully integrated with AI, that's great. And people need to hear from you what you're using it for, how you're using it, all of those details, because that's really, really important. We're going to leave the poll up for much longer, or what's going on?
Yeah, I think we can close it. We're going to leave it on for just a couple of 30-40 seconds. If that's done, yeah, we can close the poll. Okay, we have the results. Okay. Yes.
So it looks like, 52% are starting to explore AI, 19% not using it all, 26% partially integrated. That's great. And then we have 3% saying fully integrated. And that's really interesting because kind of leaning into that, we're seeing a lot of AI tools specifically pitched for recruiting. And part of having those AI tools, part of the team that vets those tools, is your recruiting operations team. That is, in effect, we are partially a research function. Not only are we a research function for tools, we're a research function for competitive analysis, understanding what our competitors are doing, what are they offering. We're also pulling information in from candidates. So all of that information is really, really important. So when it comes to AI adoption in RecOps, we're seeing that growth. We're seeing, millions of millions of dollars in tools coming out. We're seeing that AI adoption is reducing cost. And I think, and I hope this is kind of a projection for the future, one of the things that people start to see is recruiting is a revenue generator. It's not a cost center. But one of the things that people talk about when it comes to AI is, all right, how is it going to reduce the costs? Do we need less people to do the things that we're doing? And I think that's where you start to see what are the time savings? How do people now use that extra time they're getting back because they don't, say, need to spend 20 minutes building a dashboard, because they can simply use natural language to say, pull out all of these candidates who have X, Y, or Z, and the systems are smart enough to do that. I think that one of the things, and this is something that I know all the time, is that AI does have some biases that are learned. So how do you find a tool that is not biased or just trained on your own information? How do you define what good looks like? And I think that that's important before you even start looking at AI tools that are going to help you. Is what does good look like? Because if you don't know, and the minute you start putting on a tool thinking it's going to be your savior, it's just going to end up repeating that same problem. So I think one of the important things when you're pitching AI, especially if your teams are not necessarily wanting to adopt it, is look at case studies, look at metrics, There are more and more and more tools that are coming out that are talking about that. I think the other thing too is address potential concerns around data privacy. I know that there was an EEOC ruling that said, or maybe not ruling, but discussion that was last week that talked about, hey, if you're feeding candidate information into an LLM, is that legal? What do you do? How do you do those things? And those things are really, really important to know, follow, and track. I think the other thing too is talk about the competitive advantages when you're pitching AI as well, because it allows you to talk about recruiting as in the same way that people are talking about sales or talking about marketing. And that speed, that precision, those things are really, really important for the business to hear, for them to turn around and respect recruiting and recruiting operations in saying, this is how we are operating, and we are much more detail oriented, much more data driven. If you follow me, you know that I talk about the difference between being data driven and being information driven. Both are important, but both have two different usages. And when you're very data driven, you can actually use that to your advantage to pitch, because you are able to turn around and say, if we have this tool, we will get back this amount of time. And if we get back this amount of time, we will be able to use that time to maybe find higher quality candidates, work through different projects that are on the backlog that are going to make things better. So on the RecOps side, what are kind of the things that you need to do? And I think one of the things that is very important to do is tell the people on your team that AI is not magic, that there is a need to work through certain elements of dealing with AI, teach people how to write prompts. Don't just like throw AI and expect everybody to understand how to use it. Take time to teach people. That's where you get recruiting operations also as an enablement function. Recruiting enablement can be separate, but a lot of the enablement, the documentation, we'll talk more about documentation later, ends up being on a RecOps team. And it's important to keep that documentation and training going, because it's ongoing. As the AI tools change, as they interact with your systems, all of those things are going to keep on changing, and you need to sort of help people along. So this is kind of one of my predictions when it comes to AI and rec tech. With AI, different models are being trained on different systems. Eventually, all AI will probably all have the same information, because let's face it, if it has access to the internet, we all have access to the internet. It's going to pull all of that information in. It just might pull in different elements of it. But one of the things that I see kind of happening in this space is there are going to be tools that are moving faster than other tools, and people are going to want to hop on those things much more quickly. So with that, I can see how recruiting tools and more recruiting tools will need to offer month-to-month options to allow people to test their models, to see how it interacts with their data, and that flexibility there, because people will need to stay competitive, and those tools will need to stay competitive. And that's sort of something that's going to be really, really important, because as we talked about, competitive advantage is going to be there, and people are going to want to be innovating as quickly as possible. So finding the right tools for your needs. This goes back and tracks back to when I said RecOps starts with why. Not everybody needs a Ferrari. Some people do. Some people are totally fine getting from point A to point B in a Honda Fit. It's the kind of car I drive, so that's what I'll use. I do not have a Ferrari. I wouldn't know what to do with that horsepower. I also don't know how to drive stick. But the point here is you have to find the right tools for your needs. And part of that is going to come out from your discovery. And so one of the tools and things that you'll need and when you'll need it is also very, very important. So obviously an ATS, if you're in TA, is super, super important. Where are your candidates going? How do you rediscover your candidates? And I think people, when they hear ATS, especially smaller startup companies, think, oh God, this is a tool. Why can't we just build it in a spreadsheet with a Google form or a Notion page or anything like that? That still makes it an ATS. It is a way to track your applicants, and you should really have an ATS when you're starting to see increased application volumes. I also think that sometimes if you start off with an ATS at the beginning, you're able to train people on an ATS, but you're not going to need necessarily the most high-powered ATS when it's 10 people in a room, but you're going to need something that's going to be able to give you data, capture data in different kinds of ways. I think the other thing too is having a candidate relationship management tool, having a CRM. This becomes really, really important as you scale, because a lot of what the data shows, especially with candidates, is if you can't sort of remind them or keep active touch points, you're going to be forgotten by those candidates unless you've created a really, really great experience and they see your name all over the place. And this is why it's also important to keep that relationship going and nurturing. Recruiting is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And I don't say that in a bad way, but it takes time to build a relationship. Some candidates in some roles you're going to hire really, really quickly. Other roles you have to have that relationship building in mind, because once you do, you're going to be able to get the candidates more excited. You're going to get higher quality candidates because you're building those relationships. So evaluating tools to find those candidates and nurture those candidates are really, really important. So obviously, when you're evaluating new tools or anything like that, look at the integrations. Nothing is harder than when you're asking somebody to go from one system to another system and hoping the two of those talk. I think every recruiter on this call, every RecOps person on this call knows that the more clicks that you make somebody have, the more systems you make somebody code switch in between, the harder it's going to be to get the best kind of data that you want. And you might have data that is blanking on the word that I'm looking for here, but it's not going to be as cohesive as you would like. I think the other things too is you want to look at what is user friendly. Again, going back to my Ferrari metaphor, you might not need something as high powered as what you will 2 years from now, but you can always set up the roadmap and you can always set the steering that will help you get to those tools, get to that right space. And also you should be evaluating those tools for how they're going to scale with you. Certain tools can stay with you the entire life cycle because their product, their customer support, their features, their functionality, they're always adding, always innovating. And so they're staying current. Some tools, they know what they're really, really good at. They're going to be really good for you up until a certain point, and then you're going to need to go and you're going to need to find something else. But it's good to know, what does that upper limit look like? So another kind of quick poll here. Are you in search of solid recruiting tools with AI capabilities? Do a little dance while everybody's voting.
Yes, we leave the poll on for around 40 seconds. I think that should be enough. Yeah. 30 to 40 seconds. Yeah.
Just enough for a quick drink of water.
Yes. Yeah. Definitely.
And again, you can also be searching for it. It might not necessarily be connected to your company, but it's always good to be keeping an eye out on what's being developed, how it's being developed, the philosophy behind why it's being developed that way. And if they're looking for people to help contribute feedback. I think being able to help tools contribute feedback helps steer them in ways that maybe founders aren't looking at or aren't thinking about. And that's an important feature of a tool too. So great. All right. So 79% of voters said yes. Leave some tools that you're looking for down in the comments. I would love to see what that looks like. And some of you are saying no. And again, that's okay. The important part with the tool is understanding the culture of your company. And if your culture of your company is not one that's going to quickly adopt tools, don't force it. Obviously, tell them what the benefit could be, show them the benefit, but don't force it. So now kind of getting into Recruit CRM, what sort of functionality it has. Obviously, I will speak to some features that they shared with me that I thought looked really cool, kind of lean into a lot of what we've already talked about, especially that ATS, that CRM, also the AI capabilities. So getting kind of into it, what can you achieve with Recruit CRM? You can automate tasks. That's something that you're going to want to look for in most everything is what automation and how easy is it to set up that automation. There is AI for candidate matching. Again, that's sort of becoming something that a lot of people are looking for within their ATS or CRM or both. Again, talking to it, no code, drag and drop customizations. That is something that people are looking for. It's ease of use. Having that ease of use is really, really important. And then focus on growth. Again, talked about it earlier. You want a company that's not going to just sit there and wait and kind of not be thinking about what's the next thing that our user base is going to be needing. You want people getting feedback and constantly building. So something that people are talking about, obviously, resume parsing, scoring on resumes, things of that nature. Getting the information out is really important. I know we've all seen discussions on LinkedIn about people saying, oh, this is a resume that beats an ATS or beats a CRM. I personally love to say that's kind of an interesting marketing scheme, but the simplest resumes end up being able to be interpreted. My thing would be always submit actually as a Word doc or a PDF. If you submit it as a text file, you're going to run into some problems usually on most systems. Candidate summaries, we're seeing this with other tools. People want quick hitting information so that they can make sure they're not missing anything. So you get that AI assist in Recruit CRM. Candidate matching. Again, this is very common right now. People are talking about candidate matching and all of that. I personally will say this, it is important to understand how they are scored and how they are matched. I think a lot of people tend to go, okay, this person, 100% match is a perfect fit. That might not be the case. So always make sure you're double checking, always make sure that you're fact checking and making sure that you understand where the scoring is coming from. Is it coming from your job description? Is it coming from a resource library based on a job? And then obviously, we talked about this earlier, having the integrations, having extensions makes it easy because you're not asking people to go from one tool to another tool. They're doing it within one piece and everything is being carried over. So obviously, definitely a tool to give a look to. They do some really interesting and very, very cool things with Recruit CRM. They gave me a demo. I was certainly impressed by what's there. So I would encourage people to take a look. And I'm not just saying that because they are graciously hosting this webinar. I do think that there's some really, really interesting things that are happening there. And especially if you are an agency side, I think a lot of times, a lot of the ATS tools, a lot of the tools in our space are specifically built for companies, not agencies. And I think that that's an important differentiator, especially now as we are starting to see more and more people start fractional work through the fractional nature of things. This can also help in that regard. So a lot of talk also in the space right now about AI and the future of recruiting coordination. I've read numerous reports that say recruiting coordinators are going to be automated out of the process because a lot of what recruiting coordinators do is repeatable. Scheduling, checking documentation are all things that AI could do. Having said that, I think that it's important to look at what an RC also does that isn't just task oriented. So again, as I had mentioned, primary responsibilities are including scheduling interviews, candidate communication, event coordination, maintaining the tools, drafting offer letters, things of that nature. All things that people have said, well, AI is going to come in and AI is going to do that. So we don't really need people to do this. However, RCs tend to form the backbone of recruiting operations. They also tend to form the backbone of recruiting. I've talked to numerous heads of talent who say, a great recruiter is going to find us people. A great recruiting coordinator is going to 10x our recruiters' output because they have trust, they have things that are built there. Also, RCs are very, very important because they are the people that we then train on other recruiting elements and give that next generation that information. And so it's important to take a look at the RC position and see, how is this going to evolve? How are recruiting operations teams and recruiting teams going to evolve if we eliminate this position? And the truth is, it can go a number of different ways. I think that the RC role will evolve, but it should not be viewed as something that we should eliminate permanently or eliminate at all, because again, you're not going to have that group fuel the next generation if it doesn't exist, and you will slowly see the decline of an entire field. Think of it sort of like a food chain. If you eliminate what everybody is eating, things go extinct. So that's kind of something to think about there. I think the other part to kind of think about is GAI or AGI. How are these tools going to impact RecOps? I think that you're going to see RecOps, you're also going to see the RC position too. You will see our sides embrace elements for things. You will also see our sides advocating for ethical implementations, and that ethical implementation is going to be making sure that we're getting non-biased, non-hallucinating AI working with us, and we're being able to identify, hey, something doesn't look right here. If it doesn't look right and it doesn't sound right, it's probably not right. So how do we end up fixing that so that people don't anchor on information that is incorrect? And I think that's something that's important. And also preserving a human touch. One of the things that I think oftentimes gets overlooked in recruiting is exactly the fact that in recruiting and in recruiting operations, we all deal with the most combustible element on the planet, and that is human emotion. It does not take long for one thing to spark somebody if it goes wrong. And if that is the case, if we're just like, hey, everything is going to be AI and AGI and all of those things, and I don't need to pay attention to it, just watch what happens when the responder can't issue the right sort of action for the candidate or the interviewers or anything like that. It will make people upset. So I will let Xavi explain this.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So everyone, we have a quick bonus for you all. You can scan this QR code to download our Recruiter Toolkit 2024. It is a huge document. It's a downloadable PDF full of templates, that there's tips and tricks for basically everything in the recruitment industry. There's job descriptions, there's email templates, there's so much. There's tips on maximizing AI and recruitment, and just loads of content about recruitment for all people in the industry. So go ahead, you can scan this QR code using your cameras in your phone and download this kit right away. All right, I think that's it.
All right. So just to kind of recap what we've talked about kind of up to this point. So we've already talked about what do we think about, what do I think about when it comes to the recruiting coordinator position? I think that it's going to evolve. What do I think about when it comes to looking at tools? I think that you're going to end up getting shorter contracts, month-to-month contracts are going to allow you to use more tools. You're going to find the right kinds of tools. Now, within all of that, it is important to have documentation, and it's important to have knowledge management in recruiting operations. This is the part that people is not the most exciting, but it becomes the most important, because this is how you're going to tell people, how did we pick this tool over that tool? What led to this decision? What sort of documentation do we need? Do we need a standard operating procedure? Do we need a playbook? Do we need just sort of proposals? All of these things, all these artifacts, if you will, are really, really important for RecOps people, because it can tell us, where did we start? Where did we finish? What were our success metrics? How are people tracking this before me, so that you can tell the story about where we're going? So people tend to think documentation, knowledge management, very, very same thing, or the same thing. It's not true. Documentation focuses on creating and maintaining detailed records. It's manuals, it's process docs, as we've talked about, procedural docs, and it serves as a reference point. Knowledge management encompasses a broader spectrum that isn't just documentation. So it's gathering the information from employees, it's gathering those processes, it's sharing information and making it easily accessible. I think this is why we've seen people latch on to things like Notion as having a board, or Google Sites that are set up internally by teams, Go links, things like that, where it makes it very easy for everybody to move and find what information they are looking for. And it's also shown to help decision-making, problem-solving strategies, strategic planning, because all of that knowledge is really housed and easily accessible. So what knowledge management tool does your team currently use the most?
Elizabeth is also asking for the QR code of the Recruiter Toolkit. We will be sharing the image in the chat box now, in just a couple of minutes.
Okay. And survey says,
Yes, let's have the results of the poll in just a couple of seconds. Yep, there you go.
all right, so
Okay.
people said, about 50% of folks said that they have no knowledge management tool. Some people say they use a Google Workspace, Notion, Confluence, and Jira. Okay. And that's actually kind of what I would expect, because most recruiting teams, most RecOps teams, we tend to move fast. And part of moving fast means we always sort of say, okay, we'll get to the documentation later, or we're going to store this later. And that has actually been to our detriment because our lack of being able to do that, our lack of being able to show process means that folks aren't necessarily getting the information they need. It makes onboarding harder. It makes other tasks a lot harder. And we, as a function, need to do a better job of knowledge management. So what is the best practices for knowledge management? Capture essential knowledge. And what I mean by capture essential knowledge is think about what would happen if tomorrow people on your team disappeared and all of that knowledge just went with them. It would be a loss to your team. And that is something that is incredibly hard, incredibly difficult. And usually when people start doing the knowledge management, it's like, hi, I'm putting in my 2 weeks notice. And then it's this rush to be like, now write down everything that you've ever learned here. And as people have been there for longer, it makes it even harder. And that makes it tough. So that also adds to not having captured your essential knowledge. Doesn't make things easy to access, especially if there are permissions and that permission is going to pass from one person to the next. I think having a plan in place for where information is going to be, how accessible it's going to be is really, really important. Encourage ongoing training, cross-train people. This is where recruiting coordinators, that's where I learned the best and most of for my career was being brought into meetings where you're a fly on the wall. You're not expected to contribute, but you're expected to learn. And that is really, really important. And you can have people learn how to write there. Also, keep that documentation current. The more information that is held in somebody's head, the harder it will be for some other people to learn because they won't know. So have people writing constantly. Now, people have already mentioned this. People have mentioned Confluence, Notion. There are a number of tools out in the space that can help with things. I like to use Loom or IRAD for screen capturing and process capturing because I can send that link to somebody and they can do a click through and it's great. It can facilitate easier documentation. Some of the newer AI pieces that are popping up are things like Scribe, which will, again, do very similar things to IRAD, where it will capture the text, it will capture the process docs, it will help you do that. And it's sort of something where you don't have to necessarily think, okay, I got to go into a Google Doc and now I got to write step 1, step 2, step 3. Here are all the screenshots. It's going to capture that for you. The other thing too that I say is a really cool, very up and coming tool, especially for the recruiting operations space, especially for recruiting aimed specifically at recruiter enablement, is Poetry. I think what Poetry and Adam Gordon are building is a really, really interesting tool because it will house all of the recruiting documentation that you have. It has training, it has some generative AI functionality to it. So that will facilitate things as well. So I highly encourage people to go and give a look to that. All right.
Okay. So we will now transition into our Q&A sessions. Jeremy will begin by answering a couple of burning questions about RecOps that we've already received from some of you all on LinkedIn. But that's not all. We'll be taking questions from everybody live, and we already have a couple of questions there. So please feel free to submit your questions using the Q&A options on your screens. And Jeremy will try to address as many of them as possible. And if you'd like to ask the questions verbally, please raise your hands. We will unmute you and call out your name, and you can ask your questions there as well. A quick disclaimer for anybody whose questions we miss answering because there are too many questions. Don't get disheartened. We will be getting back to you over email and answering your questions there. Okay, we can move to the next slide.
Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or through my newsletter. Happy to have discussions. I love talking about recruiting operations and all those nice fun things. So getting into it. So Oftentimes people ask, what metrics should be tracked to measure the success of RecOps? This is a tough question because how do you measure a function that is usually in support when what the function does is really helping another group become more efficient? I think when I look at specific metrics and I remove the recruiting coordinator aspect of it, you tend to look at things like project completions in a quarter. You start to look at satisfaction rates. And those are kind of really big things when it comes to tracking those metrics. But a lot of things as well, too, when it comes to tracking those metrics are outside of the system. So you kind of you can make inferences. So I always say, like, if RecOps is launching a project, check it in stages, check it 30 days out, 60 days out, 90 days out to see what the impact was. So if, for example, if we change job descriptions, what do those changes look like 30 days, 60, 90 days out? That's what the kind of a couple of metrics that I throw out there. How often should RecOps processes be reviewed and updated? Weekly. There used to be a time where you would get to the end of a quarter and you would say, oh, you know what, let's go back, let's do a retro, kind of Scrum Agile style, which is a skill set that is very popular and very important to our field and our space. With how things have changed, with how companies have changed, with how the market has been for the last 2 years, 3 years, you're reviewing stuff weekly, monthly. And it's kind of important to, and especially going back to the metrics piece, separating things out so that you can view things kind of in a silo where you can track it and it doesn't get muddied. What are some common challenges in implementing RecOps and how can they be overcome? So this is a fantastic question. And there is a very human response. I think one of the things that I would also recommend, I'll throw this out there, JobSync did a very great webinar last week with James Colino and Nona Renfro. I think Renfro was her last name. Where they talked about what does it take to implement a RecOps function and things like that. I think there are three elements to the common challenge in implementing a RecOps function and how they can be overcome. I think the first is explaining to the business what the purpose of this is, what the purpose of a RecOps function is. People tend to think that RecOps functions are kind of like a basement. We're going to do everything and anything, and you can just throw stuff on our plate and we're going to do it. That is kind of an incorrect way of viewing a RecOps function. Our point is to provide efficiency. Our point is to increase satisfaction, and our purpose is to think through some of the challenges strategically that you let the recruiters solve at the individual role level, and we tend to think about at the broader level. So that's one piece. Another common challenge is that a lot of is a very human challenge, which people say, oh, well, you know what, I've done this before. How difficult can it be? Oh, I've implemented an ATS. Oh, I've written this documentation before. How difficult can that be? So there's an ego aspect to it. And the thing that great RecOps people do is they bring people into the conversation. They don't exclude people. If your RecOps function is there to police, something has gone wrong. So you have to bring people into the conversation and show them how RecOps, beyond a skill set, is a mindset. And this is how we think through problems and how we can train people to think through those problems as well. How do you ensure data privacy, and compliance in recruiting operations? Fantastic question. And it's a hard one. There is obviously the permissioning and everything that we do inside of a system to try to ensure data privacy and compliance. most RecOps teams are going to meet with legal teams, if not bi-weekly, monthly, to talk about what are changes in employment, where we have people, if we are a multinational company, what does that mean for when a law is changed in another country? How does that impact the tool that we are using? All of those different compliance pieces. So it's having a really good stakeholder management with your legal team and those other pieces. That is one way to do it. Also, asking questions from the companies that you're working with, the tools that you're working with. What is your data policy? How do we eliminate, what do we do to eliminate any sort of possible breach? So,
Okay.
questions from the audience.
Yes. So right now we have one question asked by Sam. Okay, so Sam is asking, I'm new in the RecOps career. What tools do you recommend starting with to learn about growing RecOps?
Ooh, great question, Sam. So I think one of the big things that I always talk about when it comes to RecOps is there are 4, possibly 5 pillars for RecOps. And I will say this outright, no one in this space is perfect at all 4 or 5 of those pillars. Now, those 4 or 5 pillars are usually an operations pillar that would contain recruiting coordination, tools, change management. Then you're going to have a data and analytics pillar. You'll have a programs and an initiatives pillar. You'll have strategy pillar. And depending on who you talk to, you might have employer branding, because employer branding usually gets covered in a lot of different places. It is important to ask yourself, what is it about RecOps that you love to do? What pillar does that sit in? And be very honest with yourself about what pillar that sits in. And then think, okay, what are the tools for this space? So if you go, my strength is operations, then what you want to do is look towards things that aren't your strengths. So how do you learn a data tool? How do you learn an Equitable, an Ashby, Power BI, BigQuery, all of that? What we're seeing on a lot of RecOps job descriptions now is a need to know SQL or a need to know how to use a Looker Studio or things like that. If you are noticing that, like, hey, I need to know more about programs and initiatives, learning project management techniques, learning agile, learning Scrum, learning all of these philosophies, which will help you think about how to do a problem, will help you grow your career. The strategic piece, that might just be as simple as like asking to have the conversations, being involved in conversations, and there might not be a tool to help you learn that. And then with employer branding, it never hurts to learn something like a HubSpot, how to learn about tracking links, UTMs, pieces like that, which are going to be things that are going to show up. And, in the RecOps space, it always helps to understand the insides and outs of whatever ATS and whatever tool that you're using, because you're then able to simplify and talk to people about those things. And that's also a skill set that is an important tool in the RecOps tool belt, is being able to take something very complicated and distill it down into a few words that make people really understand what you're trying to tell them.
Okay. Well, we have another question. So what are some common mistakes to avoid when setting up a RecOps function?
So I already mentioned one of those, and that is thinking that RecOps is going to come in and is going to just wave a wand and magically all of the problems are going to disappear. One of the key parts is that you're not given, like, one of the failures is when RecOps people aren't given a why. It's just sort of, hey, we've got a problem with application rates. Go solve it. And the RecOps team just goes, well, is it a systems problem? Is this, like, do we have data to back up this being a problem? What's going on here? And that can lead to a lot of confusion. And I think that context and a why are some of the biggest problems that I see when people are setting up a RecOps function. The other thing too is there are a lot of people out there who have sort of copied a job description from somebody else, from a company that they respected, and they don't really need they're looking for a RecOps person who can do everything, when really they need a RecOps person who can do one of the things in those pillars really, really well. And so there's that. The other piece too is, and I've seen this pretty frequently as well, is hiring someone who has never done sort of rec ops work. I've seen a lot of rec ops functions crash because the person that they hired was a former recruiter who maybe had really good process for their own, and now is being asked to do it at scale and is making exceptions all over the place and trying to sort of fix their previous pain points. And again, that can also happen for other people. So I don't want to single out recruiters there, but it's important that you have somebody that you're talking to and that in those interviews, you're very clear about where your company puts specific information so that they can talk to that. As opposed to sort of asking very broad and generalized questions and hoping that the candidate is going to come back at you with something very, very specific. Those are kind of where I've seen failures happen that could be avoided.
Okay. The next question we have is, this has been asked anonymously. So traditionally, what stage does an organization, either it's in headcount or funding stage, begin setting up their RecOps team? So some startups have a single HR and talent acquisition person. So what's the best practice to follow here?
Yeah, so I think the minute you start recruiting, you've already started setting up a RecOps function. Because the recruiter is going to, or whoever is doing the recruiting should be thinking about structured interview questions, should be thinking about how do you train people how do you train the interviewing to happen? How do you do little things that are all recruiting related? Like, are you going to be reporting on data? And you should. So how do you set up good data practices? So it could be anywhere from, I mean, one of the companies I worked at I was employee number 10. And I set up all the recruiting operations and recruiting functions very much like a RecOps person would. And we were able to get up to about 24 and launch an internship program and all of those things, and really be very quite automated with all of those elements. I've also worked in companies that are tens of thousands of people where, the recruiting operations function needed to get established because it was still newer and they had kind of each business group and each leader do that. So it really kind of depends on your company. But I think the minute you start any sort of recruiting, you've already started thinking about your recruiting operations function, and you already need to start thinking about, okay, when are we going to start getting a hire in here? Could be employee 10, could be employee 3, could be employee, 50 or 50,000. But you will need a dedicated resource there to help really set up everything correctly.
Okay. All right, I think that's it for the questions that we can take. In case we missed any, we will be getting back to you soon. We'll now quickly move on to the giveaways. This is something that everybody has probably been waiting for. So thank you for staying with us till the very end. We are thrilled to announce an exclusive giveaway for our dedicated audience. Here's what you could win. Okay, so we are giving away a free recruiting operations / tech stack assessment to 2 lucky winners. This evaluation will be led by Jeremy Lyons himself. The assessment includes a detailed analysis of your current operations, a tech stack review, personalized recommendations for improvements, and implementation guidance as well. So the 2 lucky winners for this giveaway will be announced on the 2nd of July at 10 a.m. PST. We will be doing a raffle draw to decide who wins. So keep an eye out on our LinkedIn company page. We will make a post about the webinar there and declare the giveaway winners in the comments under that post. And then we'll get in touch with the giveaway winners over email. And then you guys can introduce yourselves and then the assessment can begin. So best of luck to everyone. Yeah. Okay. Moving on to the next slide. Yep. Okay, this one. Before we conclude, if you enjoyed today's session and would like to learn more about recruitment operations, check out Jeremy's website, recopscollective.com. He is the best in the business, as you can see, by today's session. Jeremy, do you have any final closing remarks for the audience?
Yeah, well, first off, I would say I am not the best in the business, but I know a lot of people who would say that I am, or I'm very good or the best. I tend to like to be very humble. There are a lot of folks out there who I know who I can certainly recommend people to follow. Folks like Bennett Bear, Luke Eaton, Shannon Ogborn, Stephanie Basinger, Amy Wood. There are plenty of folks that I draw influences from. I think one of the big things that I always like to tell people is when you follow my newsletter, you will see there are a lot of companies mentioned. You will see there are a lot of people mentioned. It is a great space. And as I mentioned too, everybody has a different skill set and everybody is still learning. And there are a lot of really cool up and comers as well that I love to share and give the platform to as part of RecOps Collective and then as part of more.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Well, that concludes our session for the day. We thank all of you for joining and participating. And to learn more about us and our features, head over to recruitcrm.io for weekly discussions on all things recruitment and technology. Check out our blog and subscribe to our newsletter. We're also excited to continue all of these conversations and more on our social media channels. So do follow us there for the latest updates and resources. And don't forget to connect with Jeremy on LinkedIn. All of these links that I've just talked about are going to be in the chat box now. And we look forward to connecting with all of you again soon in our next webinar next month. So have a fantastic day. We leave the meeting on for like a minute or two so you guys can engage with all of the links. But yeah, that's it. That's it for today's session. Thank you so much, Jeremy. It was absolutely amazing having you.
Great. Thank you so much again for having me here. And again, everybody feel free to reach out. I am, always open to asking or to offering whatever advice and anything that I can to help people.
Yes. All right. Thank you. And with that, we will close the webinar. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. Have a good day. Bye-bye.